Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim. Today, I want to talk about radiation and the FEV virus in Fallout. And before I start, I just want to say this is my opinion, but it's the opinion I had back then. And I even looked at my notes and I'm like, yep, that's what I thought. And it doesn't really matter what I think because canon is now set by Bethesda. But I also want to point out that even back then, there was disagreement on the team over some of these, especially ghouls, which I will explain last because I want to walk through what my take on all of it was and what I had planned to do and make canon starting in Fallout 2 and later. So before we talk about that, I'm talking about radiation, but not solar radiation. And before we can talk about radiation, we kind of have to have a brief little like refresher on DNA. So DNA is a double helix of the four purines. All I know is they're A, T, C, and G, and that's how they pair. Only can pair with T, and C can only pair with G. So you have this double helix, and when sperm and eggs are made, it splits in two, and bits of those go into combine with the bits and pieces of the chromosomes from the other one, and then so genes get mixed and combined, and then they can reassemble because if you have half of a helix and you see an A and a C, you know it has to go T and G to connect. So in that sense, you can say that double helix DNA can repair what are called one-off errors. You lose one of those purines, it can trivially repair it. The way radiation works in real life and the way we were imagining it was working in Fallout was you're constantly being bombarded with radiation, cosmic rays, low-level beta decay of just things in your environment. And it will occasionally knock one of those off, and your body just repairs it. Sometimes very rarely, it will knock both of them off. So like you lose the A and a T, or a C and a G. Your body doesn't know how to repair that. Sometimes it terminates the cell. Sometimes the cell, the helix is collapsed. So now, if the gene was spelling out chat, it just lost one of those letters. So now it spells cat or hat. Totally different. If that cell continues, it is going to make the wrong things, the wrong proteins. Instead of making chat protein, it's going to make cat or hat protein. Sometimes that's caught and the cell is killed. Sometimes it isn't caught and the cell kind of messes up things that are going on inside your body. Sometimes the way the cell gets adjusted is it now will make copies of itself, and there's more and more of these bad cells being made, and you have cancer. So that's how it all happens in real life. And we were thinking, yeah, okay, that's how radiation is going to happen in Fallout. So then we have FEV, the forced evolutionary virus. And viruses, the way viruses work, and there's still debate on whether they're alive or not, is they insert genes into your cell so that your cell will now make more copies, not of itself, but of the virus genome. So the virus has genes inside of its genome for how to take over a cell and how to make that cell make more copies of the whole viral genome. So that's what viruses do. They infect you. They make your cells make more copies of itself because it can't do that on its own. And then we have more viruses. They infect the rest of you, or if they, are getting beaten down by the immune system. One reason you sneeze and have runny noses and diarrhea or whatever is because that's the virus's way of getting out of your body, and also your body expelling it, so it gets back out in the environment so it can infect more people. Now the FEV virus was manufactured, but it was still a basic virus. So you can think of it in terms of that word puzzle I did earlier. It can turn chat into chant because it added an extra N in there. So the FEV was designed to add genes, but it also did something else very unusual. And that's what I got from the book called Elise, A Terrifying Tale of Immortality. It's a story of a woman in the, I think, 1700s whose mother got, or father had ergot poisoning, and it led to her being born with a quadruple helix. And the side effect was it made her immortal. And they didn't really explain it in the book, but the idea, I think, with a quad helix is it takes a lot more radiation to knock out all four of those purines that are in a row. Because if that means instead of just AT-AT, instead of just AT in a double helix, you'd have AT-AT in the quad. So radiation would have to sleet into that cell and knock out all four of those. Now, it's rare enough to knock out two, but it's even rarer to knock out three and much more rare to knock out four. So a quad helix, by its very nature, would make the person who had it much more resistant to radiation mutation. In theory, it would also make them live longer because aging is believed to be mistakes in replication. So eventually your cells age, you get gray hair because your cells malfunctions and stops producing melatonin. You wrinkle, you get other problems because your body isn't making collagen and other materials at the rate it used to. It's not the only reason by far, but let's just say for terms of fallout, that's what's going on. However, there's something else that a quad helix would cause, and that is whoever has a quad helix would almost certainly be infertile. And the reason for that is when a sperm or an egg is made by meiosis, a double helix becomes that single strand, and then genes can be exchanged and stuff like that, and then it can recombine. With a quad helix, it would break up into a double helix, which has no impetus to recombine. So a double helix sperm hitting a double helix ova would necessarily become a quad helix. You could argue, well, if the virus is still around to do that, because it forced the quad helix originally. But if it's still around, then it would probably be doing other things. So the idea was the FEV infected someone, produced a quad helix version of that person, and inserted some genes in there as well. And then that was it. The FEV can't do anything more in that person. And eventually their immune system kills it off like any other virus. So we ran with that. We're like, okay, so FEV makes quad helix people. They're radiation resistant. And in the game, we just made them radiation proof. And then we added the infertility, and that was the whole way you bring the master down. And then we looked back at our other, because like everything, and I'm going to talk about the development of the setting in a future video. I need to put it all in one spot. But things happened organically. So it made us look back at other things and go, okay, how do we explain things that were in here? So it's pretty straightforward. Rad scorpions, giant ants, big bugs. Basically, those were caused by radiation. Radiation mutated them. Some of them got really big. Some of them grew, strange appendages or whatever. Okay, we can deal with that. Super mutants, death claws, and centaurs, things that were really like weird combinations of things that we know came out of a lab. Those were FEV. And we even said FEV works best on things that weren't already damaged by radiation, because radiation damages your genes. FEV doubles up your already double helix and inserts some of its own genes. If you're already damaged, that process may not work, which is why the master was looking for unradiated humans. That's what he wanted. He had his best luck with super mutants like the lieutenant when he used FEV on undamaged, unradiation damaged humans. If he went to the hub and grabbed people, he'd end up with a lot of his dumb super mutants, if it even worked at all. Some people died in the bats. But this left the ghouls. And just so you know, we all disagreed with it even back then on whether ghouls were radiation or FEV or some combination. I preferred them to be radiation only, and here's why. So when the bombs fell, we already knew what radiation did to people, and I didn't want to change it dramatically in Fallout. Most people got radiated and died. That's just what happened. But because billions of people were being irradiated, what you found was some of them lived, some of them survived it. And they were messed up and looked like ghouls. I mean, they looked horrible. Their skin and hair and everything was messed up, but they lived. Most of them had shorter lifespans because they were irradiated. Some lived a normal lifespan, but a few, just a few, for some reason, that radiation-induced mutation made them live longer. And you're probably saying, well, wait, we see a lot of these ghouls all over the place. Yes, what you're seeing is survivor bias. The ones that didn't live long are dead. The ones that did live a long time are the ones you're seeing. And I love that because that explains, like, the glowing ones. They took in a lot more radiation than normal ones, but they somehow don't die from it, so they literally glow from it. And the feral ones are just an example of humans aren't designed to live forever. We don't have brains that can keep generating memory. You eventually run out of storage. Our nerve endings are not regenerative. So these mutated, irradiated people, these long-living ghouls, are eventually going to start having problems just because of their long lifespan. And hence we see feral ghouls. So I think radiation can just explain all of it without having to stir FEV into the mix. And adding FEV to ghouls kind of messes up the whole thing we had going on with the Master, where the Master's like, I need a pure strain human. I need a human that isn't radiated. So I prefer ghouls being radiation only. I'm sure there's disagreement on that, but that's where I was going to go with it on Fallout 2 and beyond. Of course, Bethesda can do whatever they want. But I just wanted to kind of say what that was so people knew this is what I was going to do with it. This is where I was going to run with it. And now everybody can argue whether that's a good idea or not.